Sunlight spilled through the glass ceiling of the airport like it was trying to bless everyone in a hurried, IT reflected off polished floors. Shimmered on rolling suitcases, caught in coffee steam rising from open cafe doors. Morning traffic outside glinted through the windows. A bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere, a child laughed as footsteps echoed across tile. Near gate 28, Daniel Mercer stood still in all that motion that he adjusted the collar of his worn tin jacket as the sunlight hit his eyes. Squinted, blinked upward. The city hummed through the glass. Distant sirens, luggage wheels, the low rhythm of life moving forward. He checked his boarding pass. Seat 3A. Front row. His fingers tightened slightly on the handle of his small carry-on. His boots were clean but scuffed from years of walking. At his side, an espresso machine hissed as coins clattered into a tip jar nearby. Daniel tapped one foot lightly against the concrete floor. Tap, tap, across the gate. Victoria Hale stood surrounded by efficiency. Cream-colored designer suit. Sunglasses on her head. Phone pressed to her ear. Her carry-on glided beside her like a loyal assistant. Yes, I told them I must have the front, she snapped into the phone. My back doesn't tolerate discomfort. Her eyes swept the gate. They landed briefly on Daniel. Not with curiosity, with judgment. Boarding began. Daniel joined the early group. The jet bridge swallowed him in white and shadow. The airplane cabin glowed with natural daylight. Dust motes floated in sunbeams. Row 3. Seat A. Window. Daniel paused just a second. Then Saturday, he placed his bag under the seat carefully. Folded his jacket over his lap like it mattered. Behind him, fast footsteps. That's my seat. He looked up. Victoria stood over him. I paid extra, she said. You need to move. Daniel blinked slowly. This is what they gave me, ma'am. A flight attendant approached, light reflecting off her badge. She checked both passes. Sir is correctly seated. Victoria's jaw hardened. I have a back condition. I need this seat. Silence settled. Daniel looked at the window. Sunlight cutting across his hands. I can move. If there's another window, he said calmly. There isn't. The attendant replied. Victoria folded her arms. Then this becomes his problem, doesn't it? The quiet after the arrogance was heavy. The attendant hesitated. Finally, she gestured toward the narrow jump seat near the front. Sir, just for takeoff. Daniel hesitated. His jaw tightened once. Then he nodded. It's all right. He stood. Victoria sat without a word as Daniel lowered himself onto the narrow metal seat. The sunlight no longer touched him. The plane pushed back. The engines roared, and Daniel stared forward as the aircraft lifted into the clear morning sky. The cabin settled into cruising altitude beneath endless daylight. Victoria reclined slightly, satisfaction returning as she opened her laptop. Emails. Deadlines. Control restored. Daniel remained on the jump seat through turbulence. The thin metal frame vibrating beneath him. The sun shifted across his hands as clouds passed. His fingers trembled once, then stilled. When the seatbelt sign turned off, the attendant approached. Sir, you can take an empty spot near the back now. Daniel stood carefully. Slow. The aisle swayed briefly beneath his step. He made his way down the aisle. Past rows of murmuring passengers, past windows flashing silver light. Row 27, a middle seat. Saturday, a young boy across the aisle watched him with open curiosity. The boy's mother gave an apologetic smile. Long flight, she said softly. Daniel nodded. Yes, ma'am. Hours passed in soft daylight that slowly cooled as the sun lowered outside. The hum of the cabin became a backdrop to thought. Daniel stared at the back of the seat in front of him, at the tiny scratches in the plastic, at the tray hinge worn thin that he touched his jacket pocket unconsciously. Inside was a folded letter. He didn't open it. Near the front, Victoria sipped mineral water and typed briskly. She didn't look back. The plane began its descent. Light shifted gold again, but a subtle tension rolled through the cabin, bags rustling. Seatbacks upright, window shades opening. The captain's voice came through the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be commencing our final approach shortly. He paused, just a little longer than usual. Victoria glanced up, annoyed at the interruption. And before we land, I'd like to take a personal moment. The cockpit door remained closed. The voice continued. Softer. Today's flight carries someone I've been waiting 17 years to publicly thank. A ripple of confusion spread that Daniel's breath caught. Victoria straightened slightly. Silence thickened in the bright cabin. 17 years ago, I was flying a medical evacuation from Afghanistan. Our aircraft took fire on approach. We lost navigation, lost hydraulics, and almost lost every soul on board. Heads turned. I was young, terrified. The pilot continued. And one man on that aircraft kept us alive long enough to land. Daniel closed his eyes tightly. That man is on this flight today. The plane felt weightless with silence. And sir, if you'll forgive me, I'd like the cabin to know your name. Daniel stood. Slowly, sunlight poured across his face. My name is Daniel Mercer. Gasps rippled through the cabin. And the pilot said, emotion breaking control. You pulled me from a burning cockpit with one working arm and no oxygen, and told me to keep flying. The cabin broke. Hands flew to mouths. People wept. Breath caught. Victoria's face drained of color. You saved 14 crew members and 23 patients. The pilot continued. Then vanished before we could thank you. Daniel's voice came softly. I just did what anyone would. No, the pilot said. You did what heroes do. The plane touched down gently. Applause exploded. Real applause. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut and a single tear slid down his face. Victoria remained seated, still as the plane taxied. The flight attendant knelt beside Daniel. I'm so sorry, she whispered. About the seat. He smiled kindly. Everyone has their reasons. When the seatbelt sign turned off, the passengers stood, then stopped. They formed a silent aisle for Daniel. A standing ovation. Victoria rose late as Daniel passed. Their eyes met. I didn't know, she said. Daniel paused only. Once, you didn't ask. Then he walked on. Victoria stood frozen in daylight truth. Late afternoon. Light flooded the terminal. Daniel sat on a bench near the exit, sunlight warming his hands. Outside, traffic moved slowly. A bus hissed to a stop. Footsteps echoed. Victoria stood by baggage claim, staring at her suitcase until she finally lifted it. She saw him, alone. She crossed the terminal. I was wrong, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. We all are sometimes. I lived fast, she said. Too fast to see. He looked toward the bright doors. Slowing down changes everything. She offered him funding for a rehabilitation wing that he refused the name, but agreed to help build it. Weeks later, sunlight streamed through wide rehab windows. Daniel practiced movement with therapists. Victoria watched quietly. No cameras. Outside, children laughed. Later, they stood together as evening light stretched long shadows across the pavement. You never told me why that seat mattered, she said. He looked at the sky. It was where I sat on the rescue 17 years ago. I needed to face it. The sun lowered gently. Warm, honest. True wealth isn't measured by what we take first, but by who we choose to lift.